evening and welcome to the 536th episode of Travel Witch Radio. I'm Dan Schlossberg along with Roger Noriega, and we are in the 13th season of Travel Witch Radio, the show that lets you enjoy the pleasures of travel from the comfort of your armchair.
Every week at this time, we talk to people representing destinations, hotels, airlines, railroads, car rental companies, and others in the world of travel and hospitality. From authors and bloggers to broadcasters and publicists. If it's got anything to do with travel, it's got everything to do with Travel Witch Radio.
And our guest tonight is Jennifer Ashley Tepper, creative and programming director of 54 Below in New York. Welcome, Jennifer, to Travel Witch Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on Travel Witch Radio.
Thank you. First, let's let viewers know exactly what you do as creative and programming director of 54 Below.
Sure. So 54 Below, as you might think, is located on 54th Street in New York City. We are a Broadway supper club. We do about 700 shows per year, and different from a Broadway show where you're seeing the same show every night, we do 700 different shows. So you might see a Broadway star solo concert, you might see a new musical in concert, you might see anything in between. And I am the creative and programming director who decides everything that gets put on stage, negotiating contracts, putting shows together. And I've been there for the past decade.
When I was growing up in northern New Jersey, Studio 54 was a big deal New York night spot. But Studio 54 is separate from 54 Below, just so our listeners and viewers will know. But it's in the same location, right? Please share with our listeners.
Yeah, indeed. So 54 Below is technically the basement underneath Studio 54. Studio 54 opened originally as a Broadway theater in 1927. I actually have written about it in one of my books, and it's now a Broadway theater again. And as we know, in between, it was a legendary discotheque. It was also a WPA theater, and it was actually a supper club itself during the Great Depression. But it is a large Broadway theater that sits right above us, and we're, the glamorous basement underneath Studio 54, which is 54 Below.
I think you just answered my next question, but why is it called 54 Below? It's not the temperature.
There is some lore about obviously the basement of Studio 54 back in its disco heyday. Must have been quite a place to visit. So we are in that, reconfigured basement area. Rumor has it you can still find certain things in the walls, or if you know where to look.
Is it true that 54 Below was reinvented by several Tony Awards producers, including people from Hairspray and the producers?
Yes. So the founders of 54 Below are Richard, Tom, and Steve, who are Broadway producers of many years. They produce the producers, as you said, Hairspray, Angels in America. They have a long and illustrious track record of producing Broadway shows. And a little over a decade ago, they decided that their dream was to open a Broadway supper club where, you could sit in an intimate venue and you could see Broadway stars as though they're performing in your living room. And they did, and they've done an incredible job. I'm really proud to work there.
We're talking to Jennifer Ashley Tepper about 54 Below.
Why is it called Broadway's Living Room?
One of the most exciting things about being there is it's, as mentioned, it's intimate. It's 150 seats. And on any given night, you could be watching Patti LuPone on stage, or you could be watching the next big star on stage or as we're seeing on screen right now, Grease 50th reunion. We do so many reunion concerts, which feature Broadway casts reuniting, which are like special one-time only events. And also in the audience, you're going to find Broadway writers, Broadway directors. We jokingly have named every table and booth at the club after the most famous person that sat there. So sometimes I'll be like, you're headed to the Hugh Jackman booth and you are headed to the Neil Patrick Harris table. There's a lot of shows going on all the time. So, on any given week, there might be 14 different shows and you might get to see any number of Broadway personalities on and off stage.
Is it a restaurant, supper club, or both?
It's a good question. So we are a full service dining institution as well. So just like the supper clubs of the classic days of New York, you're seeing a show, you're seeing a 60 to 75-minute performance, and you're also having a fine dining experience. So our restaurant operations, we're extremely proud of. We have incredible menu, an incredible restaurant staff, and you're getting like a premium dining experience at the same time as a premium theater experience.
It's cool to know. What is its capacity?
Our capacity is about 150.
That's a good sized club then. Is it a good place to have dinner before going to a show?
Great place to have dinner. In fact, it is a great place to have dinner if you're headed to Studio 54 to see the Broadway show that's there before or after. You can come to 54 Below. So a lot of people actually do choose to have dinner at our club before seeing a Broadway show, or some people choose to make a whole night out of it at 54 Below and have dinner and a show at our club.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Jennifer Ashley Tepper about 54 Below.
And we understand 54 Below puts on 3 shows a night sometimes. What type of programming do you put on? Do visitors need advance reservations?
Yeah, so sometimes our times of our shows can vary. Almost every night of the week we have shows at 7 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. Sometimes we'll also have a brunch show at 1 p.m. Sometimes we'll also have a late night show at 11:30, but you can usually depend on 7 and 9:30. Our schedule, basically every week of the year, we pretty much have a headliner, and our headliners range from everyone from Patti LuPone to Vanessa Williams. This coming month we have Andre DeShields. We have a lot of exciting headliners who essentially play at 7 p.m. Most of the time. And then a number of, group shows, younger cast shows, Broadway folks singing pop songs, casts of Broadway shows coming to do something at 54 Below on their night off. You can really see any kind of programming, any kind of genre of music. It's all just very Broadway centric. So almost everyone performing currently on Broadway has been at 54 Below at some point. And having been there for 10 years, I've been there on many exciting nights. I remember, Lin-Manuel Miranda came in and played a piece of Hamilton before it ever went to Broadway. Almost every prominent writer on Broadway has sat at our piano and played a song from their Broadway show before it's gone to Broadway. The show that's currently at Studio 54, actually, both its star, Kelly O'Hara, and the writer, Adam Gettle, grandson of Richard Rodgers, both performed songs from that show at 54 Below before the show was at Studio 54. So we're kind of like a springboard for Broadway, a living room for Broadway. Broadway stars come by after their shows, sing a number. It's a really special place.
Wow.
One problem I have with regular theaters is viewing distance, but 54 Below tables are very close to the stage, something like 24 feet. Is that right?
Yeah, it is one of the perks. It's such an intimate, special experience. Recently, we had the great Broadway star Cheyenne Jackson, and I can't tell you how many people commented like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I saw Cheyenne Jackson sing just 20 feet away from me." So I love Broadway. I'm like a Broadway freak more than anyone. No one loves going to the Broadway theater more than me, but it is a different experience to have an intimate cabaret or concert experience where you are so close to the performer, you are getting to see them up close. You're often getting to hear them tell personal stories, sing songs that mean something to them, really share something from their heart. And, they're right there. You can almost touch them.
And that brings up a logical question. Are viewers allowed to record performances?
Yeah. So, in our current world of media where this is all, it's changed even in the past decade, audience members are often allowed to record parts of the performance. Definitely not allowed to record the entire performance. No one's sitting there with a video camera, but it is not, frowned upon to record a couple snippets to just like when you're at a pop music concert, audience members are often allowed to record something and post it on their social media. It's actually, we get new audience members all the time who saw 54 Below on Instagram, on Facebook, wherever on the internet. So it is allowed most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time.
You've already mentioned famous faces show up there all the time. Do they also stop by for pre or post dinner?
Yeah, certainly. It is really exciting when we have like Broadway luminaries in the audience. I'll say one of the most moving things about 54 Below related to that is, a lot of times we'll have someone doing a show of Kander and Ebb music and John Kander himself will be in the audience. I can't tell you how many times the late great Stephen Sondheim sat at 54 Below to watch people singing his work in the past. So it is really exciting to have people whose work is featured on stage dining with us and then also appreciating and being celebrated. Charles Strauss on his 95th birthday, writer of Annie and Bye Bye Birdie, was at 54 Below watching his work be performed. So I just mentioned a bunch of writers, but yes, everyone, stars, directors, writers. It's really exciting to have them in our midst.
What are the business hours at 54 Below? And are you open every day, even when Broadway is dark on Mondays?
We are. Monday is like one of our big nights because Broadway actors who only have Monday night off can only perform at 54 Below on Monday. So as I didn't answer your question before, we do take advance reservations. Obviously, a lot of our shows do sell out in advance. A lot of our shows go on sale far in advance so that if you're planning a trip to New York, you can check out what's playing at 54 Below 4 months from now and you'll have most of the shows up. But we also often have walk walk-ins. We also plenty of times have people who decided to come to 54 Below that day and are at the show that night. So it's kind of a mix. And our business hours, our box office is open all day, but usually the shows are at 7 and 9:30.
A question pops into my head that's not in our planned script. Do you ever do improv?
Because our venue is really like concert centric, Broadway centric, we love having, comedy shows. We love having times when we've had a number of improv related, content and material. Most of the time, people come to our venue to see a concert. So it's not, there's so many great venues in New York that focus on improv that are probably the more correct place to do it. But on occasion, we've certainly had some really special nights where Broadway actors have engaged in improv. We had a number of times where we featured a show called Don't Quit Your Night Job, where everyone from Tony Danza to Pasek and Paul, who wrote Dear Evan Hansen, performed improv on our stage. That kind of show. So it's always fun when we can do something off the beaten path like that.
And from what you're talking about, how about having Saturday Night Live do a live show from there?
I think we're a little small for that, maybe, but you never know. Never say never. Certainly, a lot of people that have been on our stage have gone on to great comedy careers. So you never know.
What are some of your favorite shows, both at 54 Below and elsewhere? We'd also like to know about your favorite actors and actresses.
Oh, sure. There's so much great theater in New York right now. We're having like a embarrassment of riches this spring as far as like new shows opening. I've seen so much great theater recently. Actually, I keep mentioning it, but the show right above us at Studio 54, Days of Wine and Roses, is really special and terrific. And there's so many. One of my favorite musicals of all time, Merrily We Roll Along, is on Broadway in an amazing revival right now. The encore season this season is terrific. All the shows I've seen there have been great. The best thing about 54 Below is really just like the volume of amazing artists and shows that I get to work with. So even though I do have some favorites over the years, it's so exciting to just have such a large volume of cool artists at any given time. Maybe my favorite was a show I created for 54 Below a number of years ago called the Jonathan Larson Project, which Jonathan Larson, who wrote Rent and sadly passed away at an early age, I put together a song cycle of all of his unheard work that was not from Rent and not from his other musical Tick, Tick, Boom. That was kind of like the show he might have put on if he had put together a 54 Below show in his youth. And it was an all-star cast, and we did this incredible 54 Below run of it. And there's a cast recording that was released. And I was just really, really proud to have worked on that and put it together with such an amazing team at 54 Below. That's kind of like an example, though, of, sometimes we have these projects at 54 Below that are sort of not categorizable, and it's, celebrating the theater in all kinds of different ways.
You're tuned to Travel Itch Radio, now in our 13th season with Dan Schlossberg and Roger Noriega. Check us out on iTunes, LinkedIn, Instagram, or the Travel Itch Radio Facebook page, among other places. And tonight we're talking with Jennifer Ashley Tepper about 54 Below.
Like 54 Below, the Museum of Broadway enjoyed a relatively recent opening. I'm sure you agree that was long overdue.
So long overdue. I can't tell you, for so many years, people have tried to put together a Broadway museum, and I'm so amazed by the team that did it. It's such a fun place to visit.
What is your relationship with the Museum of Broadway? Didn't you work on one room and visit the museum after it opened?
Yeah, so it's really cool. I need to get back there and visit it another time. One of the creators, Julie Boardman, I've known her for years. She's like a very intrepid, amazing Broadway producer. And we had been talking for a while, and I got to create the map room for the Museum of Broadway. So a lot of my work as a theater historian interacts with the history of the Broadway theaters themselves, with, the 41 Broadway houses and how they came to be, and lost theaters and things like that. So I was really honored to take on the map room, which shares with viewers, with visitors to the museum, kind of how Broadway came to be physically before they walk through and get to see all of the incredible curated rooms.
I have to ask, how big is it, and what will visitors find there? Because we hear it's an interactive experimental museum that traces the history of performing, dating all the way back to the 18th century, and even has a timeline for guests to follow.
It's very big. It's deceptively big. I think when people see, and this is true of a lot of things in New York, you see the front of the museum and you're like, oh, I'm walking into a couple rooms, but it really is, it's extensive. And I think it has something to offer for the huge, in-depth Broadway aficionado. And it has something to offer for the casual Broadway viewer who loves a few shows and is interested in learning more. It really toes the line well between, audiences of all ages, people who want to go to a museum and take pictures, people who want to go to a museum and read, information and really learn some history in depth. There's really just like so much in that museum for everybody. I love that they had rooms dedicated to specific shows when I went, and I love that they had really beautiful curated like history of Broadway timelines. And I know that I've heard it changes. They have revolving exhibits, so it'll be fun to see what else is there now.
I'm sure there are hundreds of rare artifacts, such as old programs and costumes, as well as photographs and videos that trace the history of Broadway. Do I have that one right?
Yeah, absolutely. It has all that and more. There's a lot of videos made just for the museum of creators talking about their work. And there's so many historic artifacts. It was very, very cool to see, costumes and props and set models, sheet music, all kinds of really cool history of Broadway material.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking to Jennifer Ashley Tepper about the Museum of Broadway.
Jennifer, as a fellow author, I'd love to hear about your books.
Thank you. So I've written 4 books called The Untold Stories of Broadway. There's 4 volumes. For these books, I've interviewed about 300 theater professionals. So the books take into account actors, directors, stage managers, producers, writers, a lot of Broadway professionals that aren't often interviewed, from door people to company managers, musicians, everyone in between. And basically, each of the books take you through the history of 8 Broadway theaters, 7 existing Broadway theaters, and then 1 lost Broadway theater by folks who have actually done shows there, all narrated by me, and the history that I've found about each theater. For example, if you wanted to learn about Studio 54, that chapter would take you from the earliest interview I did about someone that worked there all the way to current day, kind of knitting together the stories that have taken place in one theater. And, you might learn, in this orchestra pit, this happened in 1943, but this happened in 1983, and it happened in the exact same spot. It's sort of like a physical history of Broadway. So I've been writing the book since 2013. Eventually, there'll be 6 volumes to get through every single Broadway theater and several of the lost ones. And they've been a really, really enriching project. I'm really proud of kind of how they chronicle Broadway history.
Who's your publisher?
Dress Circle Publishing is my publisher. They're terrific. I love them very much. And one of my publishers actually just began a new job at the New York Public Library. So very proud to have my books there as well.
Are you a native New Yorker, and is that how you developed such an interest in the Great White Way?
I'm actually from Boca Raton, Florida. Shout out to South Florida. Unexpected answer, I guess. No, in fact, I was always very obsessed with moving to New York. I was always obsessed with New York from afar. I only ever visited New York 3 times before I moved here to go to NYU, which was my dream. I just always had my sights on theater and was always studying New York from afar. I think how much I was obsessed with studying it from afar actually is what made me so obsessed with the theaters themselves.
Our viewers are asking where you went to school, what you studied, and what you did before getting involved with 54 Below and the Museum of Broadway.
Yeah, I I went to NYU for dramatic writing, which was because I loved theater and writing. But it was really a program for screenwriters and playwrights and things like that. So I kind of created my own education while I was at NYU, and that was great because it allowed me to have a lot of internships while I was at school. I just did a lot of studying myself, going to see shows, things like that. And I was really lucky to have several wonderful internships during school and right after, including interning with the musical Title of Show, which went to Broadway right after I graduated, and I got to be the director's assistant. So I had my first Broadway job right out of college, which was very lucky. So NYU was a great place to be because I really got to make New York City, kind of my campus.
Did you ever have any dreams about being an actress yourself?
Not really. I loved performing growing up, and I was really lucky to have a terrific high school theater program and a terrific theater summer camp. But for me, I was so passionate about teaching other people about musicals, about the idea of being someone that made musical theater happen, just about the idea of theater history and sharing it. I loved being part of a cast, but I never quite wanted to be a performer myself.
Even though Manhattan is small, everything depends upon location, location, location. So please tell our viewers where 54 Below is and where the Museum of Broadway is located.
Sure. 54 Below is on 54th Street, right near 8th Avenue, right near Studio 54. You can't miss them. They both have those big marquees. And Museum of Broadway is on 45th Street, right near Broadway. You can see it right next to the Lyceum Theater. So both just in the heart of Times Square. Come visit us in New York City and come to both places.
What advice would you give somebody about Broadway shows to an out-of-towner hoping to make maximum mileage at a minimal time in Manhattan? Is it the TKTS booth? Is that a good place to start?
Sure, that's a great question. I think the TKTS booth is really a great place to go. You can't beat a Broadway discount and getting to experience the middle of Times Square and all of that. Today Tix, which is an app that provides discounts to Broadway shows, is also a great place to go. I also think, coming to New York, so much of it is of deciding what Broadway shows to see is what you know about. And so it's always really exciting to see something new. And of course, the newer something is, the less likely you might know about it. But I always recommend anyone coming to New York, research on playbill.com, on broadwayworld.com, on Theater Mania, find out like what the newest shows are, because it's sometimes really exciting to be the first person to see something. And you might hear about it 3 months after you go home, and then it'll be too late. So just finding out kind of what the new shows are is always my recommendation.
Jennifer, we have a comment in the chat room. I don't know if it would apply, but they're asking, do you know about the history of American Theater Wing and Antoinette Perry? There's a connection here.
Yes, that's amazing. This listener says their mom was an original member of the American Theater Wing. That's phenomenal. Oh my gosh. Shout out to your mom. So yes, Antoinette Perry is, the woman that the Tonys are named after, Antoinette Tony Perry. And the American Theater Wing, they still, after all these years, still do the Tonys. The Tonys were founded in the 1940s, and they were named after her because of all of her great work. She was, I believe, she was so involved, and she was one of the people to be involved with, the stage door canteen and with entertaining soldiers during the time of World War II. A lot of the early days of the American Theater Wing were spent in those kinds of efforts. It's crazy to think about, Broadway still going on while something like World War II was occurring. And they were very much about the humanitarian effort to link the arts with what was going on in the world and help Americans through theater. So it's really interesting to read more about that. And that's very cool that your mom was at the part of that.
That is cool. I appreciate that question. Well, first of all, Jennifer, thank you. And Randy, thank you for asking that question. I want to know, is there anything you would like to add that we haven't asked?
Always a great question. No, I think it's so fun to just think about people coming to visit New York and just think about 54 Below from a perspective of someone visiting. I always think it's really fun that we get to do streamed shows now. So if you're not quite visiting New York yet, but you want to watch at home, 54 Below does stream a number of performances live, so you can feel like you're there. And then when you come to visit New York, come see us in person.
How do Travel Edge listeners learn more about you and about your book, and how they can order copies?
Sure. So about me, I'm at Jen Ash Tep, the first 3 letters of each of my names, on Instagram. Find me there. My books are available at the Museum of Broadway, actually. You can also find them on Amazon, Drama Bookshop, anywhere books are sold that you might get them. And 54below.org is the place to go for all info about 54 Below, or you can follow us on any of the platforms at just 54 Below. We're constantly posting content about our hundreds of shows a year, so you can find me in some of that as well.
I wanted to ask you, how did COVID affect 54 Below and the rest of Broadway?
It's a good question. I don't know if I can even be brief about, but I will. COVID, it was very trying times, just like all of Broadway shut down, we shut down at 54 Below. And one of the bright sides that we have streaming now is because during that time, I think a lot of powers that be were able to come together and figure out how to do streaming for certain media. So we were very lucky to be able to add that to our programming. But it was, it was tough, and the reopening was tough, and navigating everything during the time when, it was even harder than it is now to deal with all the, illnesses and protocol and all of that was tough. And I think that theater is still in an era where we're still coming back from all of the secondary effects of the pandemic and all of the collective trauma and all of the, things that financially impacted theater and live performance. So it's definitely affected everything. But I will say, like, I'm so grateful all the time to be in 2024 where we can gather in rooms together again and present concerts and present theater. I feel very lucky about that. And I think, like, we do see people doing more personal shows. We've all experienced quite a lot together that is now coming out in art a lot of the time.
Our guest tonight has been Jennifer Ashley Tepper of Manhattan's 54 Below and the Museum of Broadway. Thank you for being our guest on Travelers Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you were terrific. And viewers, now that pitchers and catchers have reported, this is the perfect time to extend your off-season with my book, Baseball's Memorable Misses, an unabashed look at the game's craziest zeros. Get it tonight from Amazon, along with Jennifer's books on Broadway and all of her experiences. And that's it for this edition of Travelers Radio. Now, this is Dan Schlossberg, along with Roger Noriega, saying thank you for your time this time. Until next time. Next week, we'll talk to Tim Fordham-Moss about London St. Ermines, a 4-star luxury property with proximity to Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey, plus a long association with espionage. Hear about its storied history and contemporary amenities next Thursday, February 22nd at 5 p.m. New York time. For now, good night and stay safe.